Thank you. The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on assessment of SQA national qualifications in 2020-2021. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. I call on John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, as we've just heard from the First Minister, further restrictions are now necessary in order to bring R back below 1, stop the virus running out of control and to save lives. This is not, however, a return to the spring. We are not closing schools. Instead, keeping them open is the priority. We all know just how disruptive COVID-19 is to the awarding of national qualifications. We found ourselves in a position where schools had closed with very little time to prepare. Coursework was either incomplete or inaccessible, and of course the exams could not go ahead. There was no ready-made solution. We saw that from the fact that the rest of the United Kingdom faced similar difficulties, but in setting out our solution, the fact is that we did not get it right for all young people. We apologised and we acted to fix the situation. This year we have more time to prepare, but some things are still the same. The virus remains with us. It is still as virulent. It is still as infectious. So we cannot plan for business as usual. That is simply not possible. Work towards exams would normally start back in May when the schools were still closed, so pupils have already lost a significant amount of precious teaching time. And we cannot predict, no one can, how much more time might be lost to COVID-19 in the coming months. Finally, we simply don't know what spring and summer will look like in terms of the public health position. But what we can do is three things. We can learn from last year, we can consult our teachers and educationalists, and we can listen to the experts in the design of awarding systems. And every decision we take, we can hold fast to our shared aim to build an approach that recognises the hard work of individual pupils fairly and consistently. It must be an approach that does not place undue burdens on them or on Scotland's teachers. And it has to be an approach that has the confidence of the public, of employers and of the rest of the education system. That is what we've been doing over recent weeks, and I can now set out to Parliament the progress we have made and the conclusions that we have reached. We have sought to learn from last year. As I set out previously to Parliament, I commissioned two key pieces of work. I asked the OECD to extend the scope of their review of curriculum for excellence to include the question of the role exams should play in a modern educational system. That work will go forward in the coming months, but to inform the coming year, I asked Professor Mark Priestley to carry out an independent review looking at events following the cancellation of the examination diet. Professor Priestley has submitted his report and recommendations, and I want to thank him and his team at Stirling University for their excellent work and in particular for the pace at which they have completed it. We have also consulted widely, Presiding Officer. The SQA set out its initial proposals on modifications to assessments in 2021, and it is fair to say they have never seen a more extensive response. Thousands of individual submissions were received, and I want to thank everyone who took the time to engage with that work. I have personally consulted with young people, including with pupils in the senior phase, who I spent valuable time in discussion with last Thursday. We've heard the views of parents, of teachers and our colleges and universities, and the issues have been discussed with stakeholders across our education system, including those represented on the Education Recovery and Qualifications contingency groups. And of course, I have consulted medical and scientific experts. Finally, we have listened to the experts in the designing of awarding systems in the SQA, but also from our professional bodies, our local authorities, our schools and in Education Scotland. It is worth pointing out that all of this work comes at a time when the broader picture is one of an education system that has successfully returned to full-time learning. Despite the virus, attendance remains around 93% for pupils. The additional safety measures and mitigations which we recommended and teachers and staff have worked so hard to put in place are working well. This has been confirmed by the Health and Safety Executive, who have now engaged with more than 500 schools on the implementation of the COVID-19 guidance. My thanks go to everyone for their exceptional efforts to reopen schools and to deliver face-to-face education safely. However, despite this progress, the virus remains the same, and the risk remains that there may be further disruptions for individual pupils, schools, colleges or more widely across the country during the course of this academic year. It is in this context that I have found the clear recommendations Professor Priestley makes regarding the approach to awarding in 2021 of great assistance to me in making these decisions. Due to the level of disruption already caused by COVID and due to the likely disruption faced by some or all of our pupils and students this academic year, a full exam diet is simply too big a risk to take. It would not be fair. I've therefore asked the Chief Examining Officer to take an alternative approach to National 5 accreditation in 2021 rather than the usual exams. The alternative approach to awarding National 5 qualifications will be based on two key recommendations by Professor Mark Priestley. These recommendations are, and I quote, the suspension of the National 5 examinations diet in 2021 with qualifications awarded on the basis of centre estimation based upon validated assessments. And secondly, the development of a nationally recognised, fully transparent and proportionate system for moderation of centre-based assessment. So the alternative approach will be based on teacher judgment, supported by assessment resources and quality assurance. This will include, where possible, specifying between 2 and 4 pieces of work per subject that will form the basis of arriving at a final award. The SQA will today publish broad guidance on evidence gathering and estimation with a clear focus on quality rather than quantity of that evidence. That will be followed after the October break by subject-specific guidance on the key pieces of work that young people will need to complete. And to support the process, the SQA will work with Education Scotland, local authorities, regional improvement collaboratives and others to support a local and national approach to moderation and quality assurance, including the provision of assessment resources. Obviously, we must seek to maintain standards. Therefore, the SQA will work with colleges and schools during the year on the quality assurance of their pupils' work. This will include the SQA looking at a sample of work within each school and college and feeding back to the teachers and lecturers to ensure standards are maintained. The SQA will build this system of quality assurance in collaboration with the education system, drawing on its existing expertise. Put simply, an A in Aberdeen has to be the same as an A in Annan or anywhere else. But I want to be very clear to Parliament, given the controversies of the last awards process, what will not happen. First and foremost, awards will not be given or taken away on the basis of a statistical model, nor on the basis of a school's past performance. There will be no algorithm. Awards will be based on the progress of our young people and their work. This work and the judgment of the teacher, supported by appropriate quality assurance to maintain standards, will be the evidence on which grades are based. In taking this decision on National 5 exams, we also need to think about hires and advanced hires. In a standard exam year, the National 5s constitute more than half of all exams taken. From a public health point of view, not having these exams significantly reduces the risk of the exams as a whole. It means that we can build an exam diet for hires and advanced hires that is as safe as it possibly can be, using all the coronavirus mitigations we have sadly become so familiar with, including physical distancing and enhanced cleaning. That means that the exams determining the results that most pupils leave schools with, the exams that determine most people's future path into work, college or university, can go ahead as long as the public health guidance allows it. It also means that we can use the time in the school year freed up by cancelling the National 5 exams to make up some of the time pupils have lost at the end of last year. As a result, I can confirm that the higher and advanced higher exams will begin on the 13th of May, later than normal, and giving pupils back approximately 2 weeks of the learning time that they lost this year. Certification Day will remain as the 10th of August. This additional time, in conjunction with the course assessment modifications that the SQA have made following its consultation, give the greatest chances of these exams being implemented fairly. Presiding Officer, while I am taking steps that make space for higher and advanced higher exams next year, I am acutely aware that there is no way of knowing what circumstances we will face at that point. To avoid decisions being made in extremis, as quite simply had to be the case this year, a clear contingency plan will continue to be developed for those exams. This will include key checkpoints up to the February break to assess public health advice and, in the light of that, of our plans. If necessary, we will award higher and advanced higher courses based on teacher professional judgment, supported by SQA quality assurance, taking account of classroom assessment evidence, including prelims where appropriate. Presiding Officer, in deciding the way forward for this year's exams, there is a reality that we must face. Coronavirus has not gone away. If anything, it is making a comeback. Our task is to build a system of awards that can be delivered despite coronavirus, and I believe the plan that we have developed does that. It has evidence at its heart, it puts a robust system of quality assurance in place, and it works with teachers to award on the basis of their professional judgment. I believe it is fair, I believe it is rigorous, and of greatest importance, it gives us the opportunity to recognise the achievements of young people in Scotland in these challenging days.
Thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask questions were to press the request to speak buttons or press R in the chat box if asking remotely. And I call Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. This, of course, has been an incredibly difficult time for teachers and young people, and I think we all thank them for their forbearance. But we in these benches believe that a full exam diet could and should have taken place next year, and that the onus was on the Education Secretary to make that happen, or instead justify why that cannot be achieved under his watch. I'm not convinced that full justification has been offered in today's statement for the cancellation of National Fives. It does feel, Presiding Officer, like the towel has been thrown in already. But nonetheless, I welcome that a decision has been made. Questions still remain, however, so let me ask three. As National Fives will now be reliant on teacher judgment, how will national moderation actually be applied by the SQA to teacher estimates, so as to avoid them being downgraded by the SQA or overruled by ministers in the same chaotic way they were this year? Can I ask if the Cabinet Secretary can guarantee that teachers will receive full guidance as soon as possible on how to assess the progress of National 5 pupils throughout the year? And finally, if there is, and I hope there isn't, but if there is disruption to next year's exams and hires or advanced hires are unable to be sat, how can teachers assess progress if contingency plans are not announced or put in place until February of next year? That is simply too late to revert or announce an alternative. Because if the Education Secretary wants to restore the trust of parents, teachers and young people themselves, he needs to get this right, and right now.
Cabinet Secretary.
So, as I indicated in my statement, I echo the comments that Mr Green has made in relation to the contribution of teachers, which I think has been outstanding in restoring the full-time education of children and young people in Scotland, and also in sustaining education during really difficult times since lockdown in March. Mr Green is obviously holds his opinion about the sustainability of a full exam diet next spring. I've looked very carefully at the public health evidence. I've looked very carefully at the degree of risk that we would be taking were we to allow that to take its course. My judgment, and it is my judgment, is that the risks are too great. In coming to that judgment, I have consulted extensively within the education system, and the concerns that I have been very clearly expressed to me by local authorities, by head teachers, and by pupils around the country about the risks that are implicit. But it is a matter of judgment, and just now the government is making countless matters that are the subject of difficult judgment, and none of it is straightforward. In relation to the whole question of moderation, there will be work undertaken in the early part of this year, of this school year, to support the understanding of standards within schools and to assist the moderation process at school and local level. And the SQA and SQA appointees will be fully involved in that process at school level, and there will be engagement with teachers to enable that to be the case. There will be full guidance available at a subject-by-subject level, and as I indicated, there will be pieces of work that will be issued by the SQA, which will be the basis upon which assessment can be undertaken. And we will be, what I said in my statement is that the approach that we are taking on National 5 provides us with a foundation for assessment should there be any disruption to the hires and advanced hires. I stress that is not what I want to be the case. I want a full hire and advanced hire diet to be undertaken, and I'm creating more space for that to be enabled. I'm de-risking it to enable that diet to take its course. But should it be required, the approach that we're taking on teacher judgment in National 5 gives us a strong foundation for the higher assessment. Of course, we have opportunities, as I indicated, to take stock as to whether such a contingency plan needs to be applied in those circumstances.
Thank you. I now call Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Deputy First Minister for early sight of his statement. I say early, but the truth is this statement is very, very late. Teachers are months into teaching courses without knowing exactly what they should be teaching, how pupils will be assessed, and what evidence they should have been gathering. They were told exams would go ahead, but then that a final decision had not been reached. They were told courses would be amended to account for lost time, but not how, while days, weeks and months passed by. Now we do have a decision. So can I ask the Deputy First Minister, firstly, how the continuous assessment of National 4 and 5s and the exams at higher and advanced higher will take account of pupils, sometimes whole year groups, having to self-isolate perhaps more than once? Secondly, can he promise that next year no pupil will be judged on anything except their own performance and ability? And finally, will the Deputy First Minister even now revisit this year's appeals for those pupils who do not accept their school's assessment and are still denied the right to appeal?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the circumstances that Ian Gray recounts in which a young person's individual educational year was disrupted by several periods of self-isolation, for example, would be, in my judgment, the basis of a case to be made to the SQA around exceptional circumstances for which there is a well-established process for that to be undertaken. In relation, obviously, we want to try to minimise that, and there is other support in place through digital learning, through the eSchool, which is available now to support the learning of young people should their education be disrupted. In relation to the assessment of the performance of young people, I've made clear that the performance of young people will be what will inform teacher judgment, and that will be the basis of awarding. And in relation to the point on appeals, the review from Professor Priestley indicates that we should look at a number of issues in relation to the appeal mechanisms that are available. I am committed to doing exactly that, and we will consider the issues raised by Professor Priestley as part of that review.
Claire Adamson, to be followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for his statement, and thank Professor Priestley also for contributing in the publication of his report. I noticed that the issue of assessment and estimation has been key, and the Deputy First Minister has mentioned that there will be guidance produced by the SQA in these areas, but we know from before COVID and before the crisis that we have, that there were concerns about the estimation process in certain areas. So what other support can be given to schools to ensure that the assessment and the estimation process ensures fairness and consistency across all centres?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the whole process of assessment and estimation lies at the heart of the professionalism of the teaching profession. And it is important that all interested parties, whether they are in individual schools, teachers, leaders within schools, or local authorities, or in regional improvement collaboratives, work with Education Scotland and the SQA in ensuring that we enhance the assessment and estimation process that is undertaken by teachers. It is a fundamental skill that that our pupils rely upon to assess their performance, and over the course of the next few months there will be extensive engagement involving all of these different players. I have consulted widely with local authorities about the steps that need to be taken here to make sure that teachers are well supported to be able to undertake this task with the the direction and the guidance that will be offered by the SQA as part of this process. But fundamentally, we need to enhance that capacity, and we will do exactly that.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, to be followed by Rona McCann.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the unprecedented pressures faced by the further and higher education sectors at this time, sectors which, throughout the pandemic, have faced a lack of clarity from this government and which were significantly impacted by the mess the government made of this year's exam grades. So, could the Cabinet Secretary outline what discussions he has had with representatives from the universities and colleges sectors on the subject specific to today's statement, and what concerns or issues they raised with him?
Cabinet Secretary.
I really don't recognise the picture that Mr Halcrow-Johnson paints. I would have thought it might have been something to celebrate that we had an absolutely outstanding record number of young people going to higher education in Scotland today. Where was that in Mr Halcrow-Johnson's statement? Maybe it was as prominent as the Conservative U-turn on tuition fees. Maybe that's why Liz Smith isn't the education spokesperson any longer, that she couldn't bear the policy position that was about to be arrived at. So I don't recognise the world that Jamie Halcrow-Johnson is talking about. We've had extensive discussion with the college and university sector throughout all of these issues about assessment, and I have to compliment the university and college sectors for their willingness to engage constructively in finding solutions at a very difficult time.
Rona McKay, to be followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister what impact assessment the Education Recovery Group has carried out on the assessment process for practical subjects such as sciences, home economics and technical subjects, which are vital to the curriculum, but where we know that social distancing is much more difficult?
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, a very specific guidance has been given on all of these areas to the education system. It's been developed collaboratively to ensure that some of the practical issues that Rona Mackay raises can be properly addressed, and that young people are able to have as much of the experience of these courses as is possible, given the wider constraints within which we have to operate. And the Education Recovery Group has been involved in that discussion.
Daniel Johnson, to be followed by Ross Greer.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary has already stated his intent to take forward recommendation 7 of the Priestley report on the appeals process. I would just wonder if he could clarify on what basis that review will take place, and will it be independent of both the Scottish Government and the SQA?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, it won't be. We'll take it forward on the basis of the approach that would be expected of us from a government that is currently legislating to implement the United Nations Convention, incorporate the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child into domestic legislation in Scotland, and it will be undertaken consistent with those principles.
Ross Greer, to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you. I welcome the responsible decision to cancel and replace the National 5 exams. I can't work out, though, why that logic applies to the National 5s but not to Highers. So can the Deputy First Minister explain his statement that cancelling Nat 5 exams frees up capacity for Highers when those exams don't normally take place at the same time? But each Higher exam, of course, can't be staggered, given every pupil must take it at the same time. And in response to a question I asked a few weeks ago, the Deputy First Minister said he wanted to avoid at all costs an increase in teacher workload. Given teachers will need to simultaneously prepare higher pupils for exams and a contingency plan, I can't see how that's the case. But for National 5s, can the Deputy First Minister at least reassure me that the assessment system being developed will be based on work teachers and pupils are already doing, not adding something new on top of that?
John Swinney.
On the last point that Mr Greer raises with me, yes, that will be the case. And the approach that will be taken is designed to be entirely consistent with what that would ordinarily be undertaken within each subject curriculum. In relation to the point on the maintenance of the higher diet, my judgment, given the significant weight that is attached to higher qualifications as essentially the key pathway to the next stage in the educational journey of young people, is that if it is possible for us to sustain that diet, we should endeavour to do so. And that is what has underpinned the decision-making that I have taken. I have tried to de-risk that situation by removing the National 5 exams from the exam diet, creating more time for learning and teaching than would ordinarily be the case at that time of the year, and providing the opportunity for further progress to be made in that respect. I am very, very keen to ensure that this approach does not in any way add to teacher workload. So the point that Mr Greer made about the importance of this work being consistent with the ordinary content of the curriculum is a key guide for the education system and how young people should be prepared for assessment and, in some circumstances, examination.
Beatrice Wishart, to be followed by Fulton MacGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In terms of the date for the Highers and Advanced Higher exams, does the Education Secretary think that 2 weeks is sufficient time for young people to make up the learning that has been missed?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think a combination of that and the fact that the SQA will make other changes to the examinations, which will increase, for example, the optionality that within individual courses, and therefore not require every aspect of the course to be undertaken by young people, I think will create the circumstances in which the full opportunity for learning and teaching can be undertaken by young people within that context. Now, of course, we will still be wrestling with issues about the potential disruption to the school year, either individually or collectively at local level. And the digital learning approaches that we're taking are designed to try to provide some further reassurance in that respect on that particular issue.
Fulton MacGregor, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise of what supports the Scottish Government will put in place to support individual pupils and entire class groups who are asked to isolate at home?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we have in place, and I just referred to some of these issues in my answer to Beatrice Wishart, we have in place a range of digital learning support which is provided technically through the GLOW network, but it's provided through eSchool, which is essentially a partnership between the Scottish Government and Western Isles Council. But that's been extended to involve local authorities, and there is now very good work going on involving teachers the length and breadth of the country who are providing learning into that digital learning platform that can now be accessed by pupils the length and breadth of the country. I should also add that there are further reinforcement opportunities that are available for senior-faced pupils to sign up to. And this adds to the point that in my response to Beatrice Wishart, where there are after-school sessions that pupils the length and breadth of the country can sign up to if they wish to. These have been very well subscribed to by young people, and they provide another opportunity to reinforce the learning that young people are undertaking within our schools.
Liz Smith, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary, could you just put on the record that given the welcome news that the Highers and Advanced Highers will be going ahead, as far as we are aware, that there is no intention to drop any of the subjects within the normal diet for both Higher and Advanced Higher at this stage?
Cabinet Secretary.
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you very much. Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What assurances can a Cabinet Secretary give that the 2021 SQA assessment process will continue to build on the Scottish Government's work in narrowing the attainment gap to ensure that no pupil is left behind and is able to achieve their full potential?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think it's important that in these very disruptive times that we do all that we possibly can do to support young people in achieving their educational potential. As I've explained in a number of answers to colleagues today, there are a variety of different approaches being taken to support digital learning that is available, that can reinforce learning that's undertaken by young people. And then obviously if there is disruption to education, there are opportunities for that to be taken forward. And we are working to ensure that in every circumstance we have in place the full support to enable young people to fulfil their educational opportunities.
Claire Baker, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary highlighted that precious teaching time had been lost due to the lockdown and the impact this will have on hires, and that's why the decision has been taken to have later dates for the higher exam diet. And can I ask what measures will be taken to ensure that the National 5 cohort aren't disadvantaged by the time that was lost through the school lockdown period?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the young people who would be traditionally sitting National 5s will obviously have more time because they would ordinarily have seen the end of their learning and teaching at the Easter break, and then they would have gone on to study leave. They will obviously have access to further learning opportunities after the Easter break. And there will be, obviously, it will be for individual schools to make a judgment. Some schools change their the curriculum during May and into June to move on to another year group, and it will be up to individual schools to determine what is the optimal moment to do that. And I would think one of the key factors in that judgment should be whether young people who are presenting for National 5 have had adequate opportunity to maximise their potential in the estimating process that teachers will make in advance of submission of the final estimates to the SQA at that particular stage in the spring.
And finally, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Cabinet Secretary what support will be provided to pupils with additional support needs to actually help them deal with the changing circumstances and to ensure that they have an equal chance of success with their schoolwork.
Cabinet Secretary.
Our education system ordinarily, Presiding Officer, must ensure that the needs of every young person are met and that every young person has the opportunity to fulfil their potential. That lies at the heart of the answer to the question from Mr McMillan, which relies upon the extent to which the education system can fully meet all of those needs. And I give Stuart McMillan the assurance that that consideration is uppermost in the thinking of local authorities and of the government in this respect.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on the statement. We will now move on to the next item of business. May I remind members leaving the chamber to observe the social distancing measures which are in place across the campus.